For this video, we have come down to sunny Sanya in southern China to tell you about this, the all-new Ford Equator. The Equator is a product of the Jiangling Ford joint venture company, and it is only available here in the Chinese market. More interestingly than that, however, is that this is the global debut of Ford's latest design language. So if you want to know what the future of Ford looks like, I suggest you watch the rest of this video. Let's cut straight to the chase, shall we? As I just mentioned, this is the global debut of Ford's latest design language. Again, while this car is only available in the Chinese market for now, this design language will spread to other cars in other markets like the United States, Europe, and Southeast Asia, for example. So what do we get? Let's start with the most obvious and dramatic difference, which is here in the headlight design. If you picture something like a Ford Explorer or a Ford Edge, they have a much more traditional square or rectangular headlight. This, however, is a very dramatic hook shape here with some daytime running lights and then the headlight unit down here with three very cool looking LEDs. Now, even though it has a very different headlight, it does have the same Ford corporate grille, as we might call it. It's recognizably a Ford, not just because of the badge, but because of the shape here and because of the design as well. Overall, I think it's actually a very good looking car, but I'm very curious to know what you guys think. Do you prefer this new direction, or do you prefer the current design language that Ford uses? Be sure to let us know in the comments. The Ford Equator is classified as a mid-size SUV, and as you can see, it's quite large, at about 4.9 meters long. It's also about 15 centimeters shorter than a Ford Explorer. They do, however, have identical wheelbases of about 2.865 meters long. Different platforms, though. This uses an all-new platform that so far is only underneath of this vehicle, but I'm sure will be used in others, whereas the Explorer uses the rear-wheel drive CD6 platform. I also want to point out some details that were emphasized to us when they introduced the car, and that is some of the aerodynamic details. For example, here on the rear view mirror, as well as the door handles and the area here in front of the rear tires were all intended to decrease drag. The coefficient to drag on this car is about 0.34, which is pretty good for a car in this class. To be honest, this is still Ford, so they could have gone with hidden door handles, but that's a little bit too innovative for a American legacy car maker. But still, I applaud their efforts in the aerodynamics, and I think overall it's a very nice shape. The one detail I will also point out is here we have a hidden C-pillar as opposed to the visible one in the Ford Explorer. Coming around to the rear of the Equator, we see that this is a continuation, obviously, of the new design language. This lighting reminds me a little bit of what you might see in a Dodge Durango, but not in a copycat kind of way. Just the fact that it starts here and wraps and goes all the way across. I find it very handsome. This is a titanium trim level car, as you can see written very obviously here, which means that it has these very nice chrome exhaust outlets, as well as some nice features on the interior we will talk about in just a moment. But while we're back here, let's open up the back cargo area. This being a third row SUV that is about 15 centimeters shorter than the Explorer, as I mentioned, there isn't a great deal of space back here behind the third row. If you want to put a bunch of stuff, you're going to need to fold down the third row. And if you want to bring a bunch of people, you're going to need to pack light. Now that we're inside, we can talk a little bit more about the titanium trim level because it comes with a lot of features. Let's first talk, though, about how it looks. This car has this two-tone leather interior, kind of a burgundy and a lighter color here that I think is pretty attractive. You have interesting touches like the stitching in some areas of the car like this. Overall, I think it comes together quite well, especially with this, obviously not real wood so far as I know, but this plastic wood, which has a nice soft touch to it and looks relatively high quality. I'm sure that lower trim level cars will have something more like piano black plastic. I also appreciate the way that the buttons are integrated here into the wood trim. That's a very nice feature. You have wireless charging. You have your little switch here for switching the driving modes: normal, eco, sport, and mountain. Yes, there is a mountain, even though it's front-wheel drive. But, you know, aspirations, right? Here we have some different storage areas, of course, as well as the transmission dial here. Personally, I prefer a push-pull kind of thing, but this one is pretty good. Its reactions are pretty quick and easy to use. Here we have the physical buttons that control the main screen here. There are two screens, two 12.3-inch screens. You have your main one and you have your one for your dashboard. These physical buttons back here, the silver ones, are able to control the features in the main screen, which is increasingly uncommon, but I still appreciate. And then we have our, you know, electronic parking brake, automatic parking. This does have self-parking features. In terms of space, we have a center area here that's got a pretty good amount of space, as well as down here we have a kind of cubby underneath the transmission knob there. Apart from that, I only want to point out the fact that this car, this Ford, comes with a button you will not see in pretty much any other Ford apart from ones in the Chinese market, and that is the WeChat button. What that means is that if you hit this button, it's the WeChat logo. WeChat is the most popular messaging platform in China. If you hit that button, you can send WeChat voice messages to your friends and also receive phone calls or voice messages from other people. It's an example of localization that I think makes this much more appealing to Chinese consumers, and it's actually a very good idea. Ford is marketing this particular car to a specific kind of Chinese family, what they call a 6-member family. That means mom, dad, 2 kids, and then the grandparents. It's traditional in Chinese culture for the grandparents to be very involved in raising the kids, including living with the parents and the children. To that end, they advertise it as a 6-passenger car as opposed to a 7. It is technically a 7-seater. You can put someone back here in the middle seat, but they advertise it as being easier for older people and parents and children even to get into the back seat by having this center area between these two captain's seats. Speaking of the captain's seats, they are quite comfortable. They have a large adjustable headrest here with kind of airplane style pillows like that. Very comfortable. The car has separate climate controls for the first and second rows. You can also adjust the second row climate control using the voice controls from the front or even from the rear. So sitting here, I could say, hey, turn up the air conditioning here in the second row, and it would do that. You can also use the manual controls down here between the seats. And of course, down below that, you have some USB charging ports. And there are also USB charging ports for the third row, which I think is a very good feature. Speaking of the third row, let's give it a try. These are electric. They can move forward and back, of course, and fold down electrically. But we're going to do what Ford tells you to do and go through the center area here. Now, with this seat adjusted into a acceptable position, there is a decent amount of legroom, about that much space for me. Not a lot of room for my feet, but not much you can expect from a third row, but acceptable, certainly for children. There is the aforementioned USB charging port over here on the left side. There doesn't appear to be one on the right side, but one is better than none, and most cars have none in the third row. Overall, I would say pretty comfortable for very small people and children. Now that we're behind the wheel of the Ford Equator, I can talk a little bit about the powertrain. Up front is a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder EcoBoost engine. It will be very familiar if you've ever driven or learned about the Ford Edge. It's the same engine, except in this application, it's a little bit detuned. It delivers 165 kilowatts of power and 360 newton meters of torque. Backing that up is a 6-speed DCT transmission. Now, if you're hearing that and getting a little bit nervous, that's because you know about Ford's history with DCTs, and that includes the Ford Power Shift transmission, which had quite a bit of trouble around a decade ago when they put it in the Ford Fiesta and Focus. The good news is this is not the Ford Getrag unit that was in those cars. This is a Borg-Warner unit that is completely different. Speaking in terms of the driving experience so far, it's perfectly acceptable. Shifts are a little bit faster, for example, than they would be with a fully automatic transmission. And low speed usability is actually pretty good, which obviously is sometimes a concern with DCTs. There are multiple driving modes. You have normal, eco, sport, and mountain. Again, this is a front-wheel drive vehicle, but you know, everyone has to have aspirations, of course. One thing I will mention about the interior is that they have done a very good job of making it very quiet. There is some sound canceling technology going on here behind the scenes that makes it pretty solid and isolated. There is a little bit more wind noise than I would expect, however. The mirrors, which I was told are designed with aerodynamics in mind, this thing has a coefficient of drag of about 0.34, which is pretty good for a vehicle in this class. But I think one of the sacrifices to that is that you get a little bit more wind noise off aerodynamic touches like these side view mirrors here. Now, that doesn't mean that it's loud inside, it's just something that I noticed. As you've come to expect in pretty much every car sold in China these days, the Ford Equator comes with a ADAS or ADAS, Advanced Driver Assist System. In this case, it's essentially adaptive cruise control and lane keep assist. It will also go around gentle corners on its own, of course with a nice reminder to keep your hands on the steering wheel. I've used it across probably 30-40 kilometers now, and I found it to be pretty reliable. Obviously, you can't expect it to do things like more advanced systems from companies like Xpeng or Tesla or NIO would be able to do, but it works as a driver assist system. So my overall first impressions of the Ford Equator are quite good, honestly. What I find, well, there's two things that I find most interesting about it. To start with, I think that the way this car was developed was interesting. Yes, it was a joint venture vehicle between Jiangling Motor Corporation and Ford, but the impression that I got was that a lot of the more important parts, including the new platform, were mostly designed by Jiangling rather than Ford. Ford was there obviously to offer some of their own insights, but it seems like Jiangling led the way. Now, this is not a criticism. I actually think this is something that's quite good, and it's resulted in a car that is, as far as I can tell, kind of perfectly designed for the Chinese market. What I mean is that you have a Chinese company leading the way in terms of the product development, like the suspension and ride and everything, with a international company backing them up in terms of engineering and quality control. That way, you get a car that's tailored for the market with things like this WeChat button and these big screens, while also having the same quality standards that an international company has. That's something that Chinese consumers, and I think consumers everywhere, really care about. The other thing is obviously that this is the debut of Ford's newest design language. Again, I'm very interested to see what you guys think about it overall, but personally, I quite like it. I think it's a much more modern approach versus what you are currently seeing on the Ford Explorer and other Ford SUVs, even though they are pretty handsome still. But, you know, let me know what you think. I'm very curious. That's going to be all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe. It means a lot to us, and it really helps us to keep bringing you cool videos like this in the future. Bye-bye.